And today I'm here to talk about the bottom line. So making the case, the financial case for customer experience, which is one of the most challenging things to do within organizations, to persuade certain key stakeholders, I'm not saying which ones, but certain key stakeholders within the business that it's worthwhile making investment to improve the customer experience. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so the agenda that we are going to be covering off is, first of all, we're going to be talking about customer experience versus profit, and there's a question mark at the end of that for obvious reasons. The importance of time. Okay, so the why time plays such an important role in making the case for investment in customer experience. Value is a two-way street, and we'll be talking about how the whole thing gets pulled together in terms of using techniques such as journey mapping and voice of the customer as well. So first of all, customer experience versus profit. So within most organizations, investment in customer experience is the biggest challenge. Most programs live or die on the basis of whether they can actually make a case. So does anybody here have a customer experience program in place? Anything from contact center training? Is there any, can we have a quick indication, anybody here who spends money on customer experience activity? Okay. And in terms of the process that you go through, so can I ask a question? You put your hand up. What's the process that you have to go through when you're making the case for investment in customer experience?
Do you mean sort of starting as a customer would be, making that call, tracking that call, like the moments of truth?
I mean, if you want to make an investment in your business, in customer experience, okay, what's the process that you have to go to persuade the business that investment needs to be made?
Maybe it's just a proposal. It's sort of more of an expectation that would be the training for the team would be an expectation.
Absolutely. So lots of different things. Often the organization's got its head around the fact that we need to invest in customer experience. We need to do training within the contact center. It's something we've got to do, especially in a contact center environment, high turnover of people. We have to keep on investing in training to make sure it goes. If it's a one-off piece of activity, so for example, does anybody here do voice of the customer? Yeah. So is it a platform? Voice of the customer. So when you do a platform, so there are lots of different organizations that offer voice of the customer through software as a service platforms, and often the investment that you can spend in those kind of things can vary between, depending on the scale of the organization, the number of customers and the number of different products and the number of different channels that you're using. I've seen investments between £50,000 at the bottom end and £500,000 at the top end in terms of the investment. And that is a one-off payment that the organization needs to make. And in your instance, it sounds like you have a budget and it's understood. There's the budget, we spend the money because that's something we have to do. But as a one-off investment, if you're going to make £500,000 investment in doing something, typically there needs to be a business case. And if there's a business case, then typically it needs to get signed off by the CEO, the MD, and the second most important signatory on the business case document is FD. Yeah, in most British organisations, that isn't the case in most countries, but the finance director is the second signatory on the case. But the problem that we see nowadays is that customer experience is still, in many instances, seen as a cost centre as opposed to a profit centre. So it's our job to try and persuade those people in the business that it's a profit centre, not a cost centre. So many people still see the traditional adversarial model of customer experience. And what this is, as a business owner, this guy at the bottom here, traditionally, we think about customer experience investment in anything. So even like an IVR or automated call distribution or training within your contacts, any type of customer experience investment, there is often seen to be a trade-off. So what you've got to try and do is balance the profit of the organisation against the satisfaction of the customer. And there's always been this view that in order to improve profit, the customer's got to suffer in terms of the satisfaction they get. And if you improve the customer satisfaction, you're going to have to spend money on it. If you spend money on it, of course, then you reduce your profits. Now, you guys all know that that's not necessarily true. This view is quite an old-fashioned one. And one of the things that's changed this is now self-service technology. Okay, but here's a prime example of how we can improve customer experience, but at the same time reduce the costs. And very often, and Nicola will probably tell you this as well, Nicola, who's our chair for today, and their business custodian, very often when you go in and you talk to an organisation and say, yeah, we want to do customer experience, and a lot of organisations say, we're trying to do it as a cost-cutting exercise. Okay. So nowadays, that can be dangerous. If you're doing customer experience primarily as a cost-cutting exercise, your emphasis will be too much on the cost and not on the experience. So it's important to try and get the balance right between those two things. And we as consumers love self-service. We love it. We love it. Why? We're control freaks. Yeah, we like to be in control. I like to do my banking at 3 o'clock in the morning via the internet. Get my photograph taken. So we're control freaks. We like that. And the really weird thing with self-service is that as consumers, we're paying the organisation to deliver a service to us, but they're getting us to do all the work. Fantastic. And we love it because we're control freaks. Okay. So everybody now understands, and we'll go into the nitty-gritty about making the case for any type of investment in customer experience. But we now understand that doesn't have to be that trade-off anymore between profit and customer satisfaction. You can achieve both through investment in customer experience program. Okay, so what about an instance where you are competing on price, where you're a low-cost organisation? So Ryanair, who here's flown Ryanair? What did you think? Anybody have a great experience with Ryanair? It gets you there on time. And that's the great thing about Ryanair. They make you a promise and they deliver against it. They've never promised to give you a great wonder. You might not be wonderfully satisfied by it, but you pay a low price, and that's what you get. And to a certain extent, Ryanair have traded on that. They give you a good experience, but they don't deliver you good service. Sounds a bit weird, but it's true. Because the experience, the promise they make you is we'll get you there on time when you pay very little for it. You go on there, you get treated like crap, but you still keep on going back there. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, because there's a lot of organisations that understand, you know what, we can do this at low cost and we can give you a good experience. So Southwest Airlines in the United States, you know, you've been to all these sessions before. You've heard all the case studies before. Ryanair gets held up as as an example of bad service. There's a difference between service and experience. Good experience, bad service. Well, they're not a good experience, are they? But at least they deliver against the promise they make you. Versus, on the other hand, Southwest Airlines, which are a low-cost operator. But if we compare the figures that we get in terms of customer satisfaction from the customers traveling with these two organisations, and they're both low-cost organisations, you see positive 84 and you see well, it's not a negative 20. This is an NPS score. This is their own scoring system. This comes from an organisation called Wonderbat, I think it is, and this is their scoring system. So it goes to show they're both in the same area, but one still manages to deliver great service as well as being low cost. So being low cost is no longer an excuse for delivering bad service. Okay, so Let's move on. Okay, so we've all seen a number of these statistics. Okay, I'll let you read through some of them. 2% in increase in customer retention has the same effect of decreasing cost by 10%. So a lot of these figures come from Emmett Murphy, Mark Murphy leading on the edge of chaos. Okay, so we see statistics thrown out at us all the time. What's one of my, is the one here? New customers can cost as much as 5 times more than satisfying and retaining current customers. That's a figure we've seen thrown out all the time, isn't it? Okay, but they're figures. They're sound bites. Where do the facts come from to prove these specific statistics? Okay, let's have a look at it. Also, I'd like to talk about, we spoke about investment in voice of the customer platforms that you guys have got here. And Forrester Research have got a program running called Total Economic Impact, where they look at the total economic impact of an investment within customer experience. The way they do it is they look at financial, technical, operational and strategic aspects of the business, and they assess those aspects of the business. Then they look at what are the benefits, what are the costs, what do you gain in terms of flexibility. They run that through a risk model in order to assess the total economic impact. And with this specific example, they did it with Confirm It. Does everybody know? Does everybody heard of Confirm It? Confirm It is a voice of the customer platform. I've done quite a lot of work with Confirm It over the course of the last year. And they did an assessment across half a dozen voice of the customer clients that Confirm It had worked for, and they found that those clients got a 326% return on investment, total benefits of $4.85 million, a net present value of that of $3.7 million. So the case is there. Okay. Now the case is there. I've shown you examples, statistics that get thrown out there. Yeah. We've also seen examples from Confirm It, how they managed to do it. So the proof is there that it can be done. That doesn't necessarily tell you how you can do it. Okay, so that's what we need to talk about next. How do you make the case for investment in customer experience? Okay, the importance of time. Okay, so time plays 2 roles here. Time enables time, I think, is a central tenet of customer experience management. Time is probably one of the most important things in customer experience management. But time is also important for finance people as well. It's incredibly important. So if you've got to persuade the CEO or the MD, you've got to persuade the FD of your business that this is important, time can be a way to bring you onto the same page as those people, because an FD thinks in terms of time, and people who work as customer experience professionals within contact centers, within research, we need to think about time as well. Okay, so I'd like to tell you a story about time. I once had a meeting with a CEO of a FTSE 250 organisation, and as is the case, you go and have a conversation with people, you sit down, you have a coffee, you just have a general chit chat, and it sometimes turns into a bit of a Nicola might find the same. Sometimes it turns into a bit of a counselling session. You sit down and say how things are going, and they go, at first they go, oh yes, everything's wonderful, yeah, the shareholders, yeah, everybody's really, really happy. And then you keep on talking, you build rapport with somebody, they start to trust you, and then all of a sudden the truth starts to come out. And this one particular instance, this guy suddenly out of nowhere he went, oh, who am I kidding? And he had a bit of a breakdown moment, and he started telling me about the fact that he was having problems with his shareholders. He was, his customers weren't happy. And his biggest problem that he found within his organisation was infighting between the senior managers within his organisation. I spend more time trying to solve arguments between my senior management team than I do trying to resolve the problems that the customers have. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about your business. So he pulled out one of these, an org chart. Tell me about your business. He gives me an org chart, two-dimensional structure of his organization. Okay. And I said, well, he starts telling me about all the different departments, all of the different silos within his organization. And he starts talking about all of the different levels within his organization. And we talk about this for a while. And then I did something that's a little bit corny. I said to him, where's the customer within your organization? Now, I hate that question because I've had that question asked of me before. Where's the customer? Well, the customer's not anywhere within your organization. People talk about customer centricity and we're all circled around the customer. I said, well, no, I want to know physically where is the customer in relation to your organization? And he went, right, okay, well, the customer is probably on the outside looking in. Okay? This chap here is the customer. I said, right, okay, tell me about the first time that the customer hears about your organization. And he goes, right, okay, well, the first time they hear about the organization is probably from a friend down the pub. And I said, and then what's the next time they hear about the organization? He said, well, probably from something that the marketing team have done down here. And I said, and then what happens? Well, they might buy something from sales, and then they might get a bill, and then they might speak to the customer service because they have an issue, etc., etc., etc. And I said, and the line was jumping all over the page. And he sat down and he said, this is interesting. I said, what's interesting? He said, I can see what you're trying to do here. I said, what am I trying to do? And he said, well, I showed you the organization chart. He said, I showed you a two-dimensional diagram of my business. But what you've just demonstrated to me is that customers don't think about our business in the same way that we think about it. They think about it in terms of time. They start thinking about in terms of the first interaction that they had. Your relationship with the organization is dependent on time. And the judgment that you make about the organization is based on the time. And a series of interactions like this can turn into another series of interactions and turn into another series of interactions. And of course, this is what we all refer to as the customer journey. Okay. So the customer journey is the central tenet of customer experience management, and the time element relating to customer journey is what's going to help us make that financial case for any investment within customer experience management. How am I doing time-wise? Just make sure I don't run over. Okay, so we need to also think about experience at different levels. Okay, the customer experience is changing enormously, especially over the last 5 or 7 years, because nowadays experience can happen as an individual touch point. So one single interaction, you can make a judgment about that organization on the basis of a single interaction. Okay, or it might be what we call at a process level, so a combination of different touch points together, so almost like a process, either the process that the organization goes through with you or the process that you go through with the organization, so a group of interactions. Or it may be at a journey level, okay? Or, of course, we have then the customer lifecycle as well, which is your total experience that happens with the organization. And as a business, when you're thinking about customer experience, you need to think about, okay, if we're going to remodel the customer experience, I need to think about the level at which I'm going to make my argument for investment. And the reason why that's important is because of the brand. Okay? The brand is also an important part of this. And when I talk about the brand, I don't necessarily mean the fluffy logo, because a brand is so much more than that. Okay? The brand plays a very important part in the experience as well. And we'll explain why. So when you're making that decision, when you're making the business case, you also need to think about the level at which you're going to think about the experience that you want to remodel for the customer. So we can see the customer life cycle, attention, traction, acquisition, engagement, etc., across the top, the various different stages of that. And brands are really important because a brand Often your customer life cycle starts before you were born and finishes after you die. So people talk about customer life cycles in terms of, oh yeah, tell me about your customer life cycle. Well, the first time I came across the organization was. Actually, your customer life cycle can actually start before then, before you were born. So the example that I give about this is toothpaste. Does anybody have a brand of toothpaste that they use regularly? You do. You're nodding your head. What brand do you use? Colgate. I use Colgate as well. Why do you use Colgate?
Just no, I trust the brand. Always used it.
What brand did you use as a kid?
Don't know.
Probably Colgate. So what brand did your parents use?
Yeah, probably the same.
Right, customer life cycle starts before you were born. Okay? And that's the example. And I bet I know what brand of toothpaste your kids are going to use as well moving forward. So that's the important thing that we think about. The brand plays an important role in this as well. Okay, so when we're talking about brand, that's marketing kind of stuff. What are we talking about? Well, customer experience management, a lot of who here works within the operational and customer services area of their business? Okay, and how many of you guys have day in, day out scraps with the marketing team? Maybe not day in, day out, but wait a minute, the two ladies at the back are nodding there. Yeah, sometimes we have disagreements, but the really crazy thing is you're both trying to achieve the same thing. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to be talking about not only will help you persuade the FD, but it will also help you and the marketing team get on the same page. How does that sound? Yeah, you're not sure, are you? A little bit cynical at the back. No, that's never going to happen. Right, okay, so assessing customer experience. So when we make an assessment of any experience that we have as an individual, what we do is customer experience is the gap between what you expect to receive as a customer and what you get as a customer, or what you perceive that you get. Okay, your perception of the product, service, and channel experience. So with in this environment, we're probably talking mainly about service and channel, but the experience that you get comes from the product as well. Apple, the experience you get from Apple is largely predicated around the product that they sell you, which is why customer experience is more than customer service. Customer experience is experience from the customer's perspective that comes from product, service, and channel. So the perception you get is predicated on product, service, and channel propositions. However, your expectation comes from the brand. Okay. And the reason why this is important is the brand is also incredibly important from a financial perspective as well. So when we talk about a brand, what do we mean? Okay, so brand, clearly image, the logos, all of that, that's the outer ring of a brand. Then we have the identity. So the image is what you try and portray. Identity is what other people recognize within you. But then we start to get a little bit deeper. It's the promise that the organization is trying to make to the customer. And interestingly, the inner ring, reputation. So Gartner research, we've spoken about Forrester, so for balance, I think it's only right that we talk about Gartner as well, because otherwise they might get upset with me. But Gartner research have stopped using the word brand because people think about fluffy logo. They don't use the word brand anymore. If they find brand in any of their literature or any of their talks, they change it, they swap it out for the word reputation. Because fundamentally, that's what a brand is. It's your reputation. And it's so important that from a financial perspective, so when we're talking about customer experience, we're not just talking about the service we deliver, we have to think about the other side of the equation. We have to think about the brand as well. And the brand is incredibly important because where does the brand get shown? Where is the brand within the financials of your organization? Many organizations, I don't know if all of them, but brand appears on your balance sheet. It's an important, your reputation appears on your balance sheet, and therefore getting the brand right and delivering against the promise that the brand makes is important for the assessment of your brand from a balance sheet perspective as well. Anyway, we're talking around the subject. We need to get under the skin. Value is a two-way street. So when we talk about value, often we think about value from the customer's perspective, value for money. Yeah? But I want to talk about value from the organization's perspective as well as from the customer's perspective, okay? And we'll start to understand why. So at the start of the journey, you've got the company on one side, you've got the customer on the other side. And before any interaction happens between those two individuals, both parties need there to be a perception of value. Now, we've all done business with customers and we've done loss-leading deals where we know, we're not going to make any money on this. But at the end of the day, you wouldn't go in and do business with a customer if you knew that you were never going to be able to make any profit from this. You might not, sometimes we take on customers who we know we're going to make a loss from, but it might be good from a reputational perspective. It might be good from a branding perspective. So overall, our business will gain from this one loss-making customer. That's not what I'm trying to say by this. There has to be some perception of value on both sides before the relationship can start to blossom. Okay, but what do we mean by value? Okay, well, value, if we break this down from a financial perspective, the formatting's fallen out somehow. Value equals benefits minus costs. Okay, if we're going to break it down into some kind of formula. How are we going to use this formula? Okay, so we take the customer and the organization to one side. The customer has a need or want, and the organization, their need or want is to be profitable. Most organizations, that's their aim. They want to make a profit from the relationship. So value from the customer's perspective, value equals benefits minus costs. It's those benefits that as long as the benefits outweigh the costs, you have a positive value, and it's those benefits that go to deliver against the need and want the customer has. From the organization's perspective, it's the same. Value equals benefits minus costs, which is sales minus costs of sales, which is profit, and it's the profit that enables you to be profitable. Okay? This is a very transactional view of the relationship between the customer and the organization. But it doesn't just happen as a one-off instance. It also, we need to think about the relationship between the two parties over time. And the way we look at that is in terms of the value chain and in terms of customer lifetime value. Customer lifetime value. That is the key to making the credible case for customer experience. Okay, so let's talk about customer lifetime value. Does anybody use customer lifetime value within their organizations? Gentleman nodding over here. I bet your finance director does. I bet your finance director does. He's talking the same. If you talk about customer journeys and he talks about customer lifetime value, you're practically having the same conversation. Slightly different perspective, but you're having practically the same conversation. So total profit generated by a customer over time. That's the definition, a basic definition of what we mean by customer lifetime value. Let me show you, demonstrate this, okay? So what we do is this is the way in which you calculate customer lifetime value. Let me go through this really, really quickly. We market to an audience who respond, generating leads, who convert into customers. They buy from us ever so frequently, giving us sales volume, average revenue per sale into sales value, gross margin into gross profit, referral ratio into referral profit, retention period into customer lifetime value. That's fundamentally how it works. This is a very layman's customer life. There's a very complex formula that you can use to calculate this, but fundamentally, this is what we're kind of talking about. The figure that you end up coming up with here, you divide it by the total number of customers, and it gives you your customer lifetime value. Okay, but this is how you calculate it. Now, interestingly, there's a reason why I've put feet in there. It relates to the customer journey, doesn't it? It relates to the customer journey. So you're talking in terms of journeys and how important journeys are to improving customer experience. And your finance director's talking about customer lifetime value, and they're talking about the journey that the customer makes with the business from a financial perspective. This is the way of being able to get you onto the same page with the finance director. So let's give a really, I want to whiz through this because I'm conscious of time. You market to an audience of 10,000 people, 2% respond, giving you 200 leads, 40% convert into 80 customers. They buy from you every 2.5 years, that's 0.4, giving you 32 sales, average revenue per sale of, this is just an example, it doesn't relate to your industry, this is just an example. £1,000 giving you a sales value of 32,000, gross margin 50%, giving you gross profit 16,000. Referral ratio of 1.2, so every 5th customer that you have refers another customer. Okay, giving you 19,200. Now they buy from you every 2.5 years, but on average they stay with you for 3 years. Okay, so if they buy every 2.5 years, but they stay for 3 years, you multiply that up in order to get to the point where you have 57,600. So you take that 57,600, you divide it by 80 customers, gives you customer lifetime value. Now, what are we trying to do in terms of improving the customer experience? What we're really trying to do is we're trying to make each of these things better across the top. We're trying to improve them. We want to improve response rate. We want to improve conversion rate. We want to improve purchase frequency. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by making the experience for the customer better at various of these different points, by incremental changes. So let's say if we were to improve this by 10%, each of these individual metrics, performance metrics, by 10%. Okay, of course, we have to do things in order to justify a 10% increase in our price. But say if we can make a little tiny improvement, can you do 10% better at what you do? I can. I could do right now, actually, if I was being honest. No, I'm joking. We can get 10% better of what we do. So from 10,000 customers, if we improved our response rate by 10% to 2.2, then it gives us 220 leads. On the previous slide, we had 200 leads. And then we improve our conversion rate to 44% from 40%. Then we increase our purchase frequency from 0.4 to 0.44, etc., etc. And by making these improvements, we've moved from 56,000 total profit to 112,000. We've practically doubled the amount of profit that we've made by just making incremental 10% increases in all of the different things that we do across. So that could be within the contact center, that could be within the training that we do, it could be within the retention team, it could be within the complaints team, it could be within the product management team, it could be within the marketing communications area of your business. Everybody within the organization is responsible for the experience of the customer, right? Okay. And by doing so, tiny little incremental improvements. Now, you're talking about, it's important that we map the customer journey, it's important that we improve the journey. But if you could explain improving the various different stages of your journey from a financial perspective like this, and you can turn around to your FD and say, okay, we're going to improve every single step on the journey by 10%, but this is what it means from a financial perspective. Do you think they're going to buy into it? You're going to have a much easier case to do that. So customer lifetime value is how you make the customer journey. This is how you make the financial case for customer journey activity. So we see 95% improvement in our profit. Okay, from a value chain perspective as well, we can also think about the value that the customer gets as well. So everybody, you might have heard of the value chain. This is about how we look at our organization and say, how can we improve the value that the customer gets from what we do? Okay, but it isn't just the value that we add as an organization. You have suppliers as well, don't you? Who supply to you. You have distributors as well, some of you, who distribute your products and services as well. So from that perspective, the value that we give them from the customer doesn't just come from what we do, but it's what our suppliers and what our distributors do as well. That means, so when we're looking at the improving the experience, if you outsource to a contact center, does anybody outsource contact centers here? Oh, nobody. That's interesting. Oh, you do over here, yeah? So when we're talking about your contact centers, we're talking about these guys here. So it's not just about improving what you do, it's about improving what these guys do over here as well to improve the customer experience. So journey mapping and voice of the customer. I'm going to keep this really, really quite quick. We started a wee bit late, didn't we? 5 minutes. Okay, I want to give a bit of time so people can ask some questions. So journey mapping. I want to talk about a hotel. So this is an example of a very basic journey map. Thank you very much. Example of a very basic journey map. You arrive at a hotel, give bags to porter, etc., etc. But as you go through this as a consumer, what you actually do, and you might be able to see this at the top, you assess each of those interactions in terms of, have I received positive value or have I received negative value? You're making those assessments as you go all the way along. Remember, benefits minus costs. And we're not just talking about financial benefits and financial costs, we're talking about psychological benefits and psychological costs. We're talking about emotional benefits and emotional costs. And we go through this process, and certain experiences are good and certain experiences are bad. Overall, plus one experience. But if we could take the ones in red and say, okay, we can improve these. We can improve each of these by 1 point. All of a sudden, if we improved each of these by 1 point here, we'd have plus 5. Okay, so when you're looking at the experience that you deliver to the customer, you need to be asking 2 questions. So has anybody been through systems thinking approach to business transformation? If anybody's heard of business systems thinking, one of the things that the systems thinking guys do is they say, where is the failure demand? Where is the value demand? Okay, so where do we spend time within our organization fixing failures? Things where the customer's complaining to us. So identifying the failure demand. And where do we spend time doing things that the customer expects us to do? And within most organizations, you probably spend half of your time fixing things that go wrong. Which is crackers, isn't it? Identifying the failure demand and not just, and what often happens with failure demand as well, is we end up fixing the same problem again and again. Has anybody had a problem within their business and they end up fixing it again and again and again and again because we don't get to the root cause of the problem? And that's the important in terms of being able to make the financial case. So voice of the customer, I'm not going to go through this in detail because of time. I do voice of the customer programs sometimes. You can do that through platforms like the ladies that have just spoken about. You can do that from a research perspective. So quantitative research and analysis. And by doing this kind of activity, it enables you to plot what we call customer experience curves. So this is what was done for a client in the Middle East a couple of years ago, whereby this was the experience that the customer was having at various different stages of the journey. And this is what the expected experience of the customer was. So we can see this is where we are now, this is where the competitors are, this is what the customer expects. So what this tells you is where you need to be focusing your attention. This is what the customer, remember that model that I showed you with the 2 babies? This is what the customer gets. This is what the customer expects to get, that ideal journey. And what we've got to try and do is close the gaps between those various different points. How do we prioritize that activity? Well, we need to identify what's happened, pain points. So that's where a pain point is where your experience at the moment is currently at its worst. Or it's potentially where the gap between actual delivery and expectation is biggest. So pain points, either a low point in delivery or where the biggest gap is. And the moment of truth is where the customer's expectation is at their highest. Okay, that's what the customer's really going to judge you on the highest level expectation. So by doing this, it enables you to prioritize where you should be focusing your time to improve experience moving forward. Right, and there are 2 different ways in which this can be done. We've spoken about, 3 different ways. We've spoken about voice of the customer. This can also be done through mystery shopping. It can also be done by something that mystery shopping is outside in. We all understand that, getting somebody to pretend to be the customer. But we can also do it inside out as well. So a process that I follow called walking the process, where you go through the business with your employees and they will tell you where the problems are. They will tell you where the value demand is. They will tell you where the failure demand is, so you can improve the experience. Okay, so the total process that I go through, building a journey framework, voice of the customer, business diagnostics, mystery shopping, voice of the customer helps you to create the expectations of the customer. Building customer promises. Sometimes people combine customer expectations with company values in order to come up with promises and commitments, which is basically your statement of the promises and commitments you want to make to the customer, because that's what they've told you that they expect. Okay? And then current state journey mapping can be done from all of these 3 activities. Future state journey mapping, we build future state journeys on the basis of the promises that we make to the customer. If we're going to design a future journey, the future journey should reflect the promises we want to make to the customer. and the promises we make to the customer comes from what they tell us about what their expectations are. Simple. And then we can use customer promises to reposition our brand. So marketing communications guys, yay, they love that kind of thing. Okay, let's reposition our brand based on our promises, and our promises come from what our customers tell us that they expect from us. And then the future state journey mapping can create business transformation, which can be used to remodel your product, service, and channel propositions. And fundamentally, if you get both of these things right, then the gap between the position of your brand and what you deliver in terms of product, service, and channel. Now, this is crackers, because how often do marketing make a promise? You, the two ladies at the back here, how do you often do your marketing people make a promise that your organization can't deliver against? Does that happen within a lot of businesses? That's because they haven't been through this process. Okay, so conscious of time, but that's it. Thank you very much. I hope that helps you.